our esteemed guest, Dr. Sarin sir, among us today. Sir, your presence has indeed added great value and grace to this occasion. We are deeply grateful to have you with us. We are eagerly looking forward with us to your words of wisdom and inspiration. A very warm welcome to you, sir. I would like to take this moment of honor to invite our guest, Dr. Sarin sir, Dr. Giridhar Vedantam sir, Dr. Navide Raju sir, and Dr. Devi ma'am to kindly come forward and grace the occasion by lighting the lamp. Dr. Sarin Nambishan Sasikumar sir is highly respected Ayurveda physician, researcher, and academician. He has been associated with esteemed institutions and is presently serving as a consultant at Research Information System for Developing Countries under the Ministry of Ayush. His dedicated work towards strengthening traditional healthcare system and promoting integrated public health initiatives has been truly inspiring. Now I would like to invite Dr. Giridhar for felicitation of Dr. Sarin sir for his gracious presence.
मैम साइड में हो जाइए, लाइव जा रहा है।
Now I would like to invite Dr. Sarin sir to the stage to address and in the fascinating topic Glory of Ayurveda and Global Health and a discussion on WHO GCTM Global Center for Traditional Healthcare.
Video has been integrated into the video. It has been kept separately. No, no. Hello. Uh, Warm good evening to all of you. My my respectful greetings to the principal, Dr. Giridhar Vedantam ji, senior faculty members of GGIMS, Dr. Devi, Dr. Navodaya Raju, Dr. Sai, and also a warm welcome to all of you who have come from different parts of India to start a very eventful, fulfilling, and productive journey of service to the nation and service to mankind in a higher ordeal. So I hope this journey turns out to be eventually as rewarding and perhaps even further than what you hoped for. So congratulations to you on first of all getting enrolled in one of the most important emerging Ayurvedic institutions of the country. You are here because you have worked hard to be here. So you deserve the congratulations. Warm welcome, and make sure that you tap into the academic brilliance of each of the faculty who are available here so that you can carefully curate your pathway ahead. Now with this, let me move on without further ado to my topic of presentation. So under the larger theme of Glory of Ayurveda, I have been asked to speak on the Global Traditional Medicine Center at Jamnagar. So I am guessing that over the past few days you have been bombarded with a lot of lectures on different topics. So I'm sure you must have some now fair idea of the concepts of health, what actually is in relation to Ayurveda, what is happening in India with regard to national health programs or policies. I am hoping that you have some superficial idea at least, having heard about these things. So it becomes much more easy for me to delve into the topic. So I will go in a narrative format. Though I have slides here, I would rather prefer narrating it in a more free-flowing format so that it is a little more enjoyable for you also as a listener. And I will actively encourage you, because since I don't know what you know and what you don't know, I am assuming a few things. I could be completely wrong in this process. So I would sincerely request you to raise your hand and interrupt me in between if you want to ask me a question, and feel free to ask in any language that you're comfortable with, either Hindi or English. Okay, so there is no problem. That makes it quite interactive. All right. So the topic here is on the GTMC. Now we know GTMC is a WHO center. It is the Global Traditional Medicine Center. It is in India. It is a big thing that has happened in India over the past 3 years. But before we directly jump into GTMC, it becomes very important to understand a few things in the background context. Therefore, I am rearranging my presentation into 3 different parts. Okay. So the first part of my presentation will deal with the historical evolution of WHO as such, right? So how has WHO emerged? What does it do? What's its focus and activities? So that being there in the background, we then move to how WHO has looked at traditional medicine since its inception over the years. So how has the pendulum of focus shifted to traditional medicine globally? We will then also look into the landscape of India as to how, from a policy purview, from a programmatic action purview, traditional medicine has gained traction for action. And finally, after understanding this whole backdrop, we will then arrive at the GTMC. So this is how I would like to go with the presentation. So let me begin with part 1 of the presentation. Achha, sorry. If you look at the history of the world from a health question point of view, it becomes important to understand that civilization in the form of organized missionary or governance is only a couple of centuries old. When I mean that, what I mean to say is that you had individual kingdoms and you had other formations similar to kingdoms that were regional or provincial in existence and were looking at affairs that affected the common public within that geographical landscape. So, the topographical jurisdiction of such administrations was quite limited than to what we see today in our current era in terms of administration. So, you could say that it is only in the late 14th or early 15th century that the governance in the form of national governance that we see has slowly started emerging across the globe. So it started in the European nations initially, then the United Kingdom, then the United States, and then of course the Southeast Asian nations and other African nations. So this is how these things have come into play. So whenever there were administrations and nations, there were always issues of governance. Okay. And issues of governance have been directly or indirectly linked with economy or money. So that has been the case even during emperor's times, even now. Something becomes of paramount importance if it has a high impact on the economy or financial well-being of a nation or a state. So this is how it evolves into prioritization within governments, state or national, right? So similarly, in the erstwhile eras also, the first focus always within administrations has been on trade. And then anything that had far reaching effects on trade have gained attraction or attention subsequently. That is how health has come into focus in administrations. Health was never a priority in any kind of era. Though today in history books we talk about Indus Valley civilization, we talk about Egyptian civilizations, we marvel at their sanitation measures that they had adopted, the kind of water supply they had. But in actual reality, these were not intended to improve the health of populations. These were constructed as an aesthetic point of view, as a more beautification part in those emperors or in those civilizations. But today we appreciate that on account of such constructions, there may have been untoward or unplanned health benefits for the populations who are enjoying it, right? So similarly, health has always been a matter of concern only and only if there have been implications on the economy of nations. So from that purview, we are trying to reach to where WHO started from. Why WHO, even the thought of WHO originated. If we look at history from the late 1500s or the early 17th century, you can see documented history of a series of several outbreaks or epidemics or pandemics across different global regions, right? So I will give a few examples here. The first one is the, the plague in London. As you can see, this is in the mid 17th century, right? So this was an episode of major bubonic plague. Now you are aware of plague, you must have read in biology and you know what is the vector and such things. You must have a fair idea, right? And even in India, we have had a major episode of plague. Does anybody remember reading about it? I'm sure none of you were born. I was a child at that point of time. So have you ever heard that in India, in recent times, over the last 3 or 4 decades, we had a major episode of plague? Has anyone ever read anywhere? Have anyone of you prepared for UPSC examinations at any point of time? No. You have dedicatedly come to Ayurveda, is it? Wonderful. So, okay, in the year 1993, in a town called as Surat in Gujarat, we had a major episode of bubonic plague, right? So, in the modern era, bubonic plague has been well understood and there are medications to control it and manage it, and there are well established quarantine procedures. But in that era, these things did not exist. So when you had such an outbreak, especially in major cities where sanitation was not well planned. Now here the city in question is London. So in this era, that is early 17th, mid 17th century, London did not have an excellent sanitation system. So London was divided into two different parts. A part where the wealthy industrialists lived, and there was a part where the poor workers or laborers lived. These were called as the ghettos. So these ghettos had extremely unhygienic conditions of existence. Drainage were open, and these drainages were linked to open river bankments. So you had water flowing in and water spilling out, polluted water spilling out, and there was mixage. So you always had a lot of different outbreaks. So when the bubonic plague actually occurred, it was a massive outbreak in London and spread to nearby, cities like Manchester. It is estimated that almost 70,000 deaths have occurred during that period. So this was a massive episode, and then wealthy were fleeing the city. There was a collapse of business. Note the point, collapse of business, because things were shut down. Business and trade came to a standstill. So that is the important point I want to highlight here. Closure of business and mass graves. So many dead bodies, they have to be buried somewhere, and there was mass digging going around in London. London became a graveyard. Another important epidemic of that era is the Russian plague of mid 18th or late 18th century. Now this has an interesting history. This started when Russia, the Russian Empire, went into a war with the Turkish Empire. At that point of time, the Turkish Empire was called as the Ottoman Empire. Right. So when Russian troops entered into Turkish territory, unfortunately for them, in some of the villages in the borderlands of Turkey with Russia, there was already endemic plague. So have you heard the word endemic? Now you must have heard the word epidemic, right? Do you know what epidemic means? Mahamari. अच्छा. Okay. So what महामारी का मतलब क्या होता है? Yes. Spread हो रहा है. What would an epidemic mean? Simple language. Don't worry about technical terms. Ah. Sit down, sit down, sit down. Please feel free. Spreading in a particular area? Is that? Hmm. Ah. Ah. Spreading across. Very good. So that's a very good way that he has explained. There is an epicenter, there is a point of origin, and from there it spreads across. It could spread across districts, it could spread across states. So that is epidemic. Endemic means there is an occurrence of an illness or a disease periodically in a particular geographical area. So within a state, that geographical area could be a district where there is a periodic or annual occurrence of a disease, and that could primarily be seasonal occurrence. So in the district that you are currently, Gorakhpur is quite famous for an endemic disease. Have you heard? Is there any Gorakhpurians here? आप कह सकते हैं क्या है यहाँ पर खास? नहीं. Does anybody know from UP? What is the endemic disease of Gorakhpur? Absolutely. Very good. Jai, can you tell what it is? Dimagi bukhar, Mastishk jwar. Right. So Japanese encephalitis or Jai is an endemic condition to Gorakhpur. So right. So when these troops entered Turkey, there were districts or states where there was endemic plague. These soldiers contracted it, and then they did not know how to deal with it, and so it spread around. So what it shows here is plague crossing the border, entering into Russia and going all the way up to the capital city of Moscow. Now this photograph, which is not really very clear, this painting actually shows a riot happening in the city of Moscow. Riot. There is a clash happening. People are going on the street berserk. They are burning buildings, apartments, they are killing each other. What happened was in Moscow when this plague outbreak occurred, so the wealthy people were allowed to move out from the city and escape, whereas the poor labor class were constrained within the city. They were forcefully locked within the city, they were quarantined, and they were not allowed movement, and they also did not have proper ration supplies. So after beyond a certain point of time, when tempers frayed up, they just went berserk and they created a riot. So this is that depiction. So here look at the numbers, almost 1 lakh have been estimated to be dead. So the next episode, right. So in the early 19th and early 20th century, there were multiple episodes or outbreaks of yellow fever in the Americas. So when we say the Americas, geographically it constitutes USA that we know as of now, and the Southern American region, which is also called as Latin America, where you have different countries like Cuba, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, Honduras. You have multiple nations, and you also have the Caribbean nations, the West Indies, as we know today. So these totally constitute the Americas region. So during this period, that is early 18th and early 19th century, you had multiple outbreaks of yellow fever. Remember, yellow fever till date doesn't have a cure, and it is estimated that 1 out of every 5 patients turn fatal on the manifestation of yellow fever. So there is only management, symptomatic management, there is no cure for yellow fever. So during these outbreaks, there were huge amounts of mortality. There were huge deaths that were reported across these regions. What you see here is a hospital photo in Cuba. That is where initially the outbreak has started in Philadelphia, USA, and then it has spread across at different points of time to different cities and different countries, as the data shows. And the last that I'm talking about here is a cholera pandemic. It is a series of pandemics initially reported from the subcontinent at the Ganges Valley in late, in early 19th century, and then it has spread across Southeast Asia, and then from there it has gone to the Middle East, and then from there to the Europe. So it is something like a pandemic that we have seen with the case of COVID, cholera, right? So this was a massive pandemic with massive death tolls. So in this history, so what I'm trying to emphasize is over the past few decades, the world has been witness to massive epidemics, outbreaks, or pandemics with large loss of life. Now, loss of life in itself brings about devastation. So what happens is trade, industry collapses, finances collapses, revenue collapses in countries, and countries are pushed to the brink of poverty. That is why this becomes important to nations, because they do not want a disruption in their developmental trajectory. Nations not. We have seen in COVID, right? We have seen what happened in the first 2 years of COVID. We have lived through it. We have experienced it. We have seen that everything was shut down. You remember the lockdowns. Nothing was working. So many people became jobless. Revenues fell down, and the GDPs of several nations have crashed down. So this was happening there. This became an important thing, and then what happened was there were certain world events also that happened. In the early 20th century, we had the First World War. If you remember, we had the First World War, and the World War ended in 1921. So when the World War ended, it was a long drawn battle. And when the World War ended, nations were exhausted and their economies were rattled. So they decided that we have to find a way to avoid another world war. And we also have to find a way to rebuild our nations, rebuild our economies. For that, we need to have a grouping. We need to have a common association, or we need to have a common, what do you say, organization. In order to bring about that common grouping or organization, these nations of the world sat together and created something that is called as Okay. So, yeah. Okay, right. All right. Scroll. Okay. So, the first intergovernmental international body of nations or associations of nations was the League of Nations, which was formed in 1920. This was initiated by the then US President Woodrow Wilson, and there were about 34 member nations which came together to form this League of Nations. So, interestingly, none of the superpowers of that time, that is Russia or USA, were members, but you had other nations like Britain, Germany, France, Italy. These nations were part of the League of Nations. So, this League of Nations held a conference called as the Paris Peace Conference, wherein they took an oath that we will do all that is necessary to maintain world peace and avoid massive conflicts like the one that we witnessed recently, that is World War I. We have to bring about world peace, because only with world peace can we bring about development, can we bring about movement of goods and exchange of knowledge and revenue. So that was the whole objective of this grouping. And the idea was that we will resolve global disputes through arbitration, and not enter into any physical war. So among different priorities of the League of Nations, one of the priority mentioned was global health. Why? Again, because peace and health both are critical and crucial for development. That is why this word comes here. Otherwise, you may think, why does health come in the League of Nations? It comes here primarily because of that. However, there was a problem with this organization. What happened was, there was a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication between members themselves. So, for example, if one member country had a dispute with another member country, let us say for a territorial issue, right? If one member country, like for example, let us say Germany, felt that its territory was being encroached by a neighboring country, let us say Switzerland, then it would want to take immediate military action in order to mitigate, demonstrate a might of power. So it has done that. Then immediately the League of Nations have come in, step in and said, you cannot do that, you do not have the authority, you are a signatory to this thing. And then they say, no, we can't, because they have caused damage to us, they have caused destruction to us, we will have to repay it in kind. So this kind of conflict started emerging, not able to arrive at a complete consensus on several issues. Also, there were things that erupted, like there were, there were other, other kinds of internal groupings that were happening between nations. Like for example, within Europe, there were Eastern European nations who were trying to form a bloc together, because they were being drawn towards communism, whereas the Western European nations were moving towards democracy and liberalization. So there were these two kind of blocks. So there were these differences in world views and philosophical views also. So there were these kinds of conflicts happening, and finally what happened was, despite the presence of a League of Nations which promised to maintain world peace and resolve global disputes, despite all that, the Second World War happened in 1942. The Second World War broke. So this directly led to a weakening of stature of this organization. तुम्हारे होते हुए भी वर्ल्ड वॉर हो गया, तुमने तो बड़े बड़ी बातें की थी, but you are not able to do it, you are not able to accomplish what you have promised. So it eventually crumbled, collapsed, and then the superseding structure, that is after the completion of World War II, another structure as we know today came into being, and that organization or entity is called as the United Nations. So that was the successor to the League of Nations. Now, during the existence of the League of Nations, the League of Nations had wanted to focus also on health, on global health as a priority. So they established an organization called as the League of Nations Health Organization. Established in 23, it had two administrative bodies. It had an administrative body called as Health Section and an executive body called as a Health Committee. Now, The whole idea was to create a better world by looking at prevention, elimination of diseases, and such mechanisms. So, for that, they were looking at collecting data, health data, and statistics, and translating it into research and actionable policies and programs that would promote national health status and indexes. So, as to bring about regional health development and overall global health development. Here too, this organization faced a few blocks because one thing was that it could not exert its influence across the globe, though it was meant to be a League of Nations international organization. It found challenges in exerting its communication or orders or roadmaps or plans across the world. Why? Because in different regions of the world, there were already regional organizations that were working on health. For example, in the American region, there was something called as the Pan American Sanitary Bureau that was already existing much before the origin of the LNHO. And there was also in the African region, I mean, in the European region, there was this international, the hygiene public. So the Office of International Hygiene. So this was there in Paris. So these organizations, they had their own mandate and they were already carrying out certain programs and policies that were in line with what their region needed. So the LNHO's dictums or guidelines came quite often at crossroads with their own programs and policies. So due to this kind of conflicts, LNHO also started weakening in stature. So the League of Nations and its appellate body, the LNHO, that was intended to give a focus on global health, crumbled eventually during the Second World War period, and thereafter the United Nations comes into existence. Now, what happens? The United Nations comes into existence in 1945, immediately after the ending of the World War, with the same objective that the League of Nations came, that we should have a global body to monitor conflicts, to resolve disputes, to avert war, to strive for collective development, to strive for collective upliftment of populations in terms of knowledge, in terms of capacity, in terms of finance, in terms of growth and development. So the UN comes into existence in 45 with these larger objectives. It takes a leaf from its failure, earlier failure. So they were much more careful. If you read through the UN Charter, it's a document which is available online. You can see that so many things have been written wherein they have taken great care to not repeat the mistakes that was envisaged or articulated during the creation of the Charter of the League of Nations. Right. So the UN, after it comes into existence, it had its first conference in San Francisco, right? The first UN General Assembly, as we say that. So in that General Assembly, two members, Brazil and China, propose that within, under the aegis or umbrella of the UN, let us have a global body, a health body, like what existed earlier. So let us also convene a conference to discuss the roadmap for that global body and if possible, charter a constitution for that global body by consensus. So that conference was then done in Paris in 1946. There was a technical preparatory committee that was constituted by the UN. And this committee then deliberated on how to create a global health body, what should be its functions, what should be its directions, and what should be its organizational setup. So this was a massive technical committee meeting, and they have created a report. And these proposals were then sent in July 46 to the International Health Conference that was held in New York, again convened by the UN. So these proposals are then gone there and these proposals are ratified at the health conference. And then after ratification, then finally in 48, in 1948, the WHO comes into existence by signature ratification of 26 member countries, right? So there were 34 member countries at the time of constitution of WHO, but 26 of them had ratified it, and this comes into existence on 7th April 1948. And what is 7th April 1948 celebrated every year as? Yes? No AI, please. Immediate answers. What is 7th April every year celebrated as? No idea? International Health Day. Okay, International Health Day. That is what it is celebrated. It is the day of origin of the WHO. Okay, so this is how WHO comes into existence. Now, this is the structure of WHO. Now, WHO, you might have heard about WHO since your school days also. You might have read about it somewhere or the other. But what is WHO? WHO is an organization today. It has 194 members. It has 194 members. So these members are called as member states. Okay. So this is a multilateral body located. Where is the headquarters of WHO? Where is the headquarters of WHO? Geneva. Okay, Geneva, yes, Geneva. Okay, so 194 member states. So this is the organizational structure. If you look hierarchically, the highest body in the WHO is called as the World Health Assembly, right? And this is the decision making body. That means all plans of actions, all policies, etc. are created at this level. Okay. So this is the highest decision making body. It has member states. All member states are represented. So today we have 194 member states, which means the World Health Assembly also has 195 members. And who are these members? These members are generally the health ministers of these member states. So India, as you know, is also a member nation of the WHO. Okay, so then you have an executive board. Now this executive board has a smaller membership. It has only representatives from 34 member nations. But these representatives again are chosen from different regions of the world. Okay, WHO has divided the world into 6 different regions, right? So 34 countries are picked up from these different 6 regions of the world. So roughly around 5 to 6 countries from each region are picked up and represented in the executive board, wherein here the executive board reviews proposals and drafts the budget for WHO. Right. Then you have a secretariat, which is a large body, which is led by the Director General of WHO. So WHO has an operational Director General who is appointed by the World Health Assembly by voting by member states. Okay. Does anybody know who is the current Director General of WHO? Does anybody know which country he belongs to? Okay, so his name is Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, and he was the former foreign minister of Ethiopia. So this post goes in a rotational basis. Okay, prior to him was a Southeast Asian, a Chinese lady who was called as Dr. Margaret Chan. So this regionally is, this office goes in a rotational basis and is regionally reported. Okay, so let us leave it at there. And then I was talking about regional offices that the WHO has. So WHO has divided the global landscape into 6 different regions. These are the regions: Eastern Mediterranean region, which looks at the African nations of Egypt and that belt, Lebanon, Egypt, what do you say, uh, Jordan. So that region is called as the Eastern Mediterranean region. Then you have the European region. You have the Southeast Asian region, which you are all familiar with. Then you have the Western Pacific region, which contains Australia, New Zealand. Then you have the African region, which of course contains both the continents of Africa. So these are the regional offices, and then within the regional offices, the member states, each member state has a country office. So this is the constitution organizationally of the WHO. Now, how does WHO does its program? So if you look at the funding for an organization to exist, it needs money, right? It needs funding. So where does the funding come from? Usually WHO's funding comes from 2 different sources. One is called as assessed contributions, wherein each and every member state has to mandatorily or compulsorily pay a certain amount of membership fee. How is that membership fee calculated? That membership fee is calculated by assessing biannually, because budgets are made for every 2 years. Okay, so once a budget is approved, it holds good for every 2 years. So biannually, every member state's GDP, the gross domestic product, and growth rate is assessed, and depending on the stature of the state, like whether it is a developed nation or whether it is a developing nation or whether it is a third world nation, based on the category of nation, a certain percentage of the GDP is calculated as a contribution. So that is the assessed contribution, mandatory contribution, which constitutes 20% of the WHO's budget, and the remaining 80% comes as voluntary contributions. These contributions are, again, they can be from member states themselves. Apart from what I am compulsorily giving, I have surplus money with me, I want to give further money to WHO, nobody stops me, I can give. So that is there. And then there are organizations, international organizations, some of them like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, then you have what do you say, World Bank, then you have other agencies, there are international agencies, United Nations Development Program, UNDP, UNICEF. So there are many such international agencies that can donate and do donate money to WHO, which constitutes 80% of the funding. Now the catch here is 20% comes from within members and 80% comes from external people. So what happens? When you take money from outside, external agents, you are also under 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 I didn't get you, sir. Can you be loud? अच्छा अच्छा, ओके ओके ओके, सॉरी. तो मैं ये कह रहा था कि जब आप 80% आपका फंडिंग बाहर से लेते हो, यानी कि प्राइवेट पार्टियों से लेते हो एज एन इंटरनेशनल बॉडी, क्या हो जाता है? देयर बिकम्स क्वाइट ऑफन ए conflict of interest. There becomes quite often a conflict of interest and also chances of corruption. So this problem is there with any international government body. Let it be United Nations, let it be UNDP, let it be World Bank or anything, you know. So this kind of thing is always there. So there is a consistent struggle within the organization or body to remain true to its founding principle or its major, you know, lingua franca, what it stands for. So let us see at the contributions. If you see this map, there are two different images. Here, this is the assessed contributions, mandatory contributions, okay, based on the country's GDP and percentage. This is data for 2022 because that is the data that is openly available at the moment. We don't have the other data. You can see here, United States is the highest contributor, right, to WHO in the assessed contribution. And then you can see the other major players. Now, if you come to the voluntary contributions, again you can see that the United States continues to be in billion US dollars. I mean China and the United States, and then you can see the whole, they are all in millions. So United States singularly is the highest contributor to the WHO. WHO needs funds for running programs, for supporting technical staff and carrying out research work. Now, there has been a crisis with WHO recently. Are you aware of that crisis? Is there anybody here who is very much interested in geopolitics, international politics, who watches news regularly, who reads? Yes. So do you know what is the crisis that is currently plaguing WHO? From what you have read here, can you just figure out what could be the crisis? Please sit and feel. Okay. That's an important point you have raised. That is an accusation against WHO, and there are a lot of you know, grounds on basis of which such accusation still continues to emerge. Okay, but that is not the crisis right now. That was a crisis of confidence during that era. It still exists, but major crisis is financial crisis that WHO faces today. Why? Because our very dear friend, the most noble friend of India, the President of the United States, has made a decision to stop all funding to WHO. And this decision was made within the first few weeks of his presidency. In fact, it is one of the first few executive orders that he has passed. You know, all funding, voluntary funding as well as mandatory funding has been withdrawn, which means US is pulling out of the WHO. So there is going to be a huge fund crunch, and there is already a fund crunch. That affects WHO's organizational capacity to carry out programs at scale or research at scale. So now please bear in mind that there is this crisis with WHO, and I will tell you why you need to bear this in mind. Then you will understand when we go to our topic why this thing is important. So right now there is a crisis. Okay. So these are the core areas of work. Some areas are like, creating standards. Okay, these are the standards which all of you should adhere to. International classification of disease, and it creates from time to time guidelines on vaccines, medicines, etc. Then it helps countries, member states to strengthen their health systems by giving them technical support, knowledge, and guidelines. It works with member countries whenever there are outbreaks. Do you remember a few years ago, COVID-19, though we have seen, it was a multinational coordination, but also earlier in Africa, there was this Ebola outbreak and Zika, and then there was H3N1 in China several years ago, influenza in China. So there were these outbreaks wherein the WHO actively coordinates with the member countries. And then of course, there is monitoring and evaluation, which is a regular thing. WHO collects data from all member states, health data from all member states, does evaluation reports, and projects the health status of nations. So these are the main four core areas. Superficially we'll go, no need to break your head on this. Then it also works with other United Nations bodies. I've given a few examples, and these are the areas in which WHO specifically works with these organizations. Apart from that, across the globe, WHO also has 800 collaborating centers, over 800 collaborating centers, which are primarily academic institutions. They could be universities or they could be research institutes. Why are they collaborating centers? Because WHO is not a know-all organization. It is an organization that has been constituted for the purpose of improving global health, but it may not have internally all the technical expertise. We think WHO is something huge. Yes, it is huge in terms of the stature, in terms of the money, but in terms of competence, WHO directly depends on internal technical competence within member nations to help them, guide them, frame. For example, with traditional medicine, with Ayush, WHO has no competence. WHO will naturally come back to India to help it create standards or create guidelines or create strategies specifically in relation to Ayush. So this is how WHO works. So it works through these collaborating centers. Now I will come back to part 2 of my presentation, wherein we are going to look at to see how the focus of WHO has moved and how within India itself focus has moved to traditional medicine over a period of time. So when WHO was formed, as usual, initially the focus was on disease elimination. That was the major focus, and the disease of that era, cholera, malaria, major, ones which had the burden of countries were in highlight, were in systemic focus. There was also focus on the biomedical aspects like improving water quality, improving sanitation, etc. However, there was an important event that occurred in the late 1970s. This is called as the Alma Ata Conference. This is something that you may study as your actual course program begins. So I will not really delve deep into it. Basically, what happened was the World Health Assembly, which is the highest decision-making body of the WHO, they met in a place called as Alma Ata in USSR. So this was in this country called as Kazakhstan, right? So Alma Ata declaration, in the Alma Ata conference, they deliberated on how to strengthen health within nations. They said that we should not focus on tertiary care, we should not focus on secondary care, we should focus actively on primary health care, because the burden that is there at super specialty hospitals or tertiary care or at secondary care can be reduced if you strengthen primary health care. And in order to strengthen primary health care, you must look at all available resources that exist within your countries. All available resources, money, different kinds of health systems or different kinds of health practices that exist in your nations, including indigenous health practices or what we would refer to as traditional medicine, right? So you have to tap into these existing practices to strengthen health within your own nations. So that became a resounding call, and there was this target that the Alma Ata conference echoed, that was health for all across the globe, across nations by 2020. Then during that period, after the Alma-Ata conference, there was also regional offices of WHO which were already engaging in pilot projects, in small trial projects, wherein traditional medicine was trying to be integrated into primary healthcare following Alma-Ata. Okay, so this is one important thing where the focus of WHO started moving to traditional medicine. Thereafter, WHO took it up on itself institutionally that yes, we will take this agenda forward with a sharp focus. So this is the institutionalization of traditional medicine work that WHO has carried during this period for over 21 years. So here during this period, WHO has come out with two important publications. The names of these publications are given here and the period at which they came out is also given. These publications helped bring about or guiding member states on regulations, quality control and research standards in relation to traditional medicine. That is the contribution and importance of these publications that were brought about by WHO. And also during the same period, over 60 member states of WHO have evolved national policies and regulatory policies in relation to traditional medicine. So these kind of things have been happening parallelly, simultaneously. I am giving you a very small gist so that I don't confuse you much. So these things have happened with the active involvement of the WHO. And then for the very first time, WHO brings about a global strategy on traditional medicine that you can see. This book is available online. You can download it and read it. Right. So this strategy talks about four priorities. These priorities are given here. You have to integrate traditional medicine into national health systems. You have to look at their safety, efficacy, and quality. You have to increase their availability and affordability, and also you have to promote rational use. That yani ki promote evidence-based use. Do not blindly promote it as a government, but see that it is safe, efficacious, bring evidence, and allow it to be used extensively within the communities. Right. And then over the next 15 years, WHO has expanded its strategy. It brought about another traditional medicine strategy book 2014-23, and there was a conference that was held at Beijing 2008, wherein a certain declaration called as Beijing Declaration was adopted. This declaration said that governments should integrate traditional medicine. So it is more of a reaffirmation. Whenever a new conference happens, they are just reaffirming what you are telling so as to bring it or articulate it much more strongly and give it that kind of importance. Right. And then different regional offices like the African regional office of WHO rolled out action plans with regard to traditional medicine, how we should carry out traditional medicine integration into our national systems within our geographic region. Now, if you come to the case of India, now we have seen how it has pivoted, how WHO has pivoted towards traditional medicine. In the case of India, we know that at least we are aware of all the classes that you have heard that earlier, Ayurveda or Ayush systems had a lot of state patronage by the kingdoms, erstwhile kingdoms in India. However, when India was being planned to become an independent country, the interim government of India or the interim council that was overseeing the transition to an independent India constituted a committee to look into the different dimensions of governance of India. Similarly, a committee was constituted to look into health planning for India. That committee was called as the Bhore Committee. Again, you will learn about this in one of the subjects in your first year. So nothing to worry. Bhore Committee. The man who had led the committee was called as Sir Joseph Bhore. So he was a Indian civil servant, like what we call as IAS officer, civil servant, and he created a voluminous report giving a blueprint or a roadmap that India's health system will be three-tier. Three-tier means there will be a primary healthcare system, there will be a secondary healthcare system, there will be a tertiary healthcare. So three levels का healthcare system हम बनाएंगे, लेकिन इसकी बुनियाद रहेगी. The foundation for this health system will be modern medicine. It will be biomedicine and not any traditional medical system. So this was the articulation, and that is how the India's health system was carved out. However, in the subsequent years, that is from the third five-year plan onwards, the government of India had constituted various health committees to look into how health systems in India can be strengthened. And these committees at different points of time have articulated the need for strengthening traditional medicine in India, especially with regard to education and research. So all these reports have several recommendations. Again, you will be reading about these committee reports in your first year itself. And thereafter, in the late 70s, the different kinds of research councils were established. So professional standards were created by the research council. So in India, these are the different phases of growth of traditional medicine. And in the 80s, after the Alma Ata conference, we had our first national health policy. This national health policy came into being in 1983. So this national policy said that we need to develop the indigenous medical systems that exist in India. That is how they use the word indigenous medical systems. And in 95, a department of Indian systems of medicine and homeopathy was established under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Remember, we did not have an independent identity till 2014. We were under the Ministry of Health and Welfare as a very small unit, getting a very minuscule budget and doing things that we could do with that amount of money. So it was a department of ISM and H, which then started coordinating with different research councils and pharmacopoeia laboratories for creating standards of education, standards of research, and pharmacopoeia standards. And then also during this period, there has been a spurt in the growth of Ayurveda education subsector with the spurious flow of several Ayurveda colleges across India. From 2000 onwards, there has been many major events in India from a policy perspective. In 2002, there is a national policy on Indian systems of medicine and homeopathy that was created. Now, this national policy said that we need to mainstream the Indian systems of medicine and homeopathy into national health system of India. It is important that they are brought directly into the national health system, and also health planning and education should be strengthened involving Indian systems of medicine. So this was the first initial independent policy document for traditional medicine or Ayush as we know in India today. And thereafter, the Ayush department, the ISM department, has been renamed into Ayush in 2003. In 2005, something called as the National Rural Health Mission, NRHM, has come into existence, wherein a particular core strategy called as mainstreaming of Ayush and revitalization of local health traditions came into being. Under this strategy, co-location. Have you heard about all these things? Probably you're hearing it for the first time, is it? NRHM, have you heard about NRHM? Have you ever heard about it? No, no? Okay. So NRHM was a particular policy decision by the government of India to correct India's health architecture, because the government of India started feeling that primary health care in India is weakening. It is not strong enough, it is not effective enough. So we need to strengthen it. And because of that, we had this architectural correction through a mission mode that is called as the National Rural Health Mission. So they have done a huge amount of guideline changes with regard to primary health care, referral, drug supply, etc. Among those several strategies that they have outlined, they have mentioned that mainstreaming of Ayush should happen through a strategy called as co-location, which means if there is a primary health center जहां पर एलोपैथिक ट्रीटमेंट चल रहा है, ओके, वहां पर हम एक आयुष फिजिशियन को को-लोकेट करेंगे, उनको वहां पर साथ में बिठाएंगे. बिठाएंगे क्यों बिठाएंगे? ताकि वहां पर आने वाले मरीज को एक ऑप्शन मिले. अगर उसकी चॉइस आयुष की तरफ हो तो ही कैन चूज आयुष हेल्थ केयर सर्विसेज और ही कैन चूज आयुष ड्रग्स. So this kind of co-location strategy was built into the NRHM document as a core strategy. लेकिन क्या हुआ है भारत में कि co-location तो हो गया है, लेकिन जो co-locate हुए हैं वो शेयर बन गए, मतलब दे ऑल प्रैक्टिस एलोपैथी ओनली विद इन दिस सेक्टर. सो दिस वाज हैपेंड. इस दौरान लगभग 8000 फैसिलिटीज में कोलोकेशन सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट की फंडिंग सपोर्ट के साथ किया गया है. 2014 में स्वतंत्र मंत्रालय बना आयुष का, इंडिपेंडेंट मिनिस्ट्री कम्स इनटू एक्सिस्टेंस. 2014, the same year, a national Ayush mission comes into existence. The Ministry of Ayush brings about a program called as National Ayush Mission Don't worry about these terms. These are all new terms to you. Just remember that something was brought. Something called as National Ayush Mission was brought. Under National Ayush Mission gave a guideline that across India, across different Ayush institutions of India, these are the kind of programs that we will carry out. This is how we will bring in manpower. This is how we will fund. This is the kind of funding that we will give you, and this is the kind of infrastructure we will create. So all that is there in the National Ayush Mission. It replaces all the previously existing Ayush programs under the Department of Ayush. And the third National Health Policy of 2017 in India says, once again, something that was already articulated in earlier policies, that we need to integrate Ayush or traditional medical systems into national health programs, specifically in relation to non-communicable or chronic diseases. तो ये बताया गया है. And now you have understood the history of WHO. You have now understood how WHO moved towards traditional medicine and how the growth of traditional medicine happened in India. Now, oh, I'm sorry, I think exceeded a bit, but I'll wrap up in under 10 minutes. Huh? Do you have class now? You have a class, sir? Okay, so I'll just wrap in 10 minutes. Okay, so the GTMC, so you have heard about the GTMC, right? You have been hearing it about in the past few days. So in simple words, can anybody tell me what is GTMC? Just within 1 minute, can anybody tell me in simple language? What do you understand from whatever you have heard so far? Don't feel shy, just feel open, converse, simple language. हाँ जी बताइए. Treating people with traditional medicine. तो GTMC ट्रीटमेंट करता है. GTMC ट्रीटमेंट करता है क्या? अस्पताल है, मैन्युफैक्चर करता है. अच्छा, so somebody is telling treatment, somebody is telling manufacture. Huh? Research. Okay, a lady has said research. Madam, I didn't get you, sorry. Fund provide करना, funding. Okay, research funding. हाँ, अच्छा, okay, good. Collection of traditional knowledge from each country. So our gentleman here has said that. Let's look. Let's see if, how much of you are right here. Right. So basically, GTMC is the unit created exclusively for traditional medicine, as the name sounds. So no intelligence is required here. A global unit. Importance here is that it is for the very first time in the history of WHO that a unit which is equivalent, which is considered equivalent in operations, in scale, in staff strength to the headquarters of WHO is created outside Geneva. इतने सालों में WHO ने कभी भी दुनिया में कहीं भी इस तरह का एक हेडक्वार्टर लेवल का एक यूनिट बनाया नहीं, क्योंकि WHO को यकीन ही नहीं है कि वहां पर वो टिक पाएगा या वो बेहतरीन रूप से काम कर पाएगा. WHO is not aware of it or not confident about it. This is the very first time in the history of WHO that such a unit has come into existence. Now, how has it come? Has it come out overnight? ऐसे अचानक आ गया क्योंकि मोदी जी ने कह दिया कि हो गया, मोदी है तो मुमकिन है. No, that is not the case. The case is India has a long history of technical collaboration with WHO over since right from the 1950s. Okay, we have been collaborating with different dimensions of WHO. For example, जहां पर disease eradication का focus था मलेरिया में, कॉलरा में, भारत like many other member states has actively contributed technical expertise, because India has always been a country with technical knowledge expertise, especially in the field of medicine. We have always had good competent scientists and researchers globally. So India has been an active collaborator with WHO in the health domain. तो ये तो होता रहा है. प्राइमरी हेल्थ केयर के दौरान अल्माटा के बाद भी कोलैबोरेशन है, एक्टिव कोलैबोरेशन है. ट्रेडिशनल मेडिसिन पे जब फोकस आए तभी भी कोलैबोरेशन, काफी सालों से, काफी दशाब्दों से कोलैबोरेशन चल रहा है. तो इंडिया का एक छवि बनी हुई WHO के दृष्टि में इंडिया की एक छवि ऑलरेडी स्थापित है. सेकंड, ITRA Jamnagar, the Institute of Training and Research in Ayurveda. This is also the only institute of national importance in Ayurveda in India. This has been for several decades a collaborating partner for WHO in traditional medicine. Right. तीसरा, WHO ने NRHM को एग्जाम्पल के तौर पर बताया कि भारत ने NRHM में मेन स्ट्रीमिंग ऑफ आयुष को करने की कोशिश की. फिर ISM नेशनल पॉलिसी ऑन ISM एंड H जब आया था, उसको भी उदाहरण सहित बताते हुए कहा है कि भारत एक ऐसा देश है जहां पर एक मॉडल रूप से इंटीग्रेशन करने की कोशिश की गई है. सो दिस इज वन टेम्पलेट दैट कैन बी लुक्ड इनटू, समथिंग दैट इज credible. And already over the years, India has accumulated several USPs. It has a dedicated ministry, it has robust regulatory councils, pharmacopoeia, etc. And then it has WHO India partnership, as we have already discussed. COVID-19 pandemic के द्वारा across national countries, across global nations, traditional medicine came to the forefront because several countries reported interventions using traditional medicine, including India, China, Korea, Japan, Sri Lanka. Several countries have reported handling COVID-19 effectively in different geographical pockets of their jurisdiction using traditional medicine. Right. So ये सब, all these factors have cumulatively pushed WHO's own thinking on creating a global knowledge hub. WHO पिछले एक दशाब्द से सोच रहा है कि हमें कुछ करना है, ग्लोबल नॉलेज हब क्रिएट करना है. तो जब ये सब इवेंट्स है, स्पेशली द COVID-19, there was a push from WHO side, and that is during that time that the government of India offered on its own that since you are already thinking of this, we are willing to be the host country for setting up such a global hub. And that is how the GTMC comes into existence in India. So what you see here is not actually the GTMC. What you see here is the ITRA in Jamnagar. Right. So GTMC right now doesn't have an independent building. It is still in the construction stage. It is expected to complete construction maybe in 5 years time. Okay, okay. So as I told you, the very first time WHO has started something which is considered as headquarters level unit outside Geneva, it shows a confidence of WHO on India's strategic leadership on healthcare in traditional medicine, as well as also points out that India has been a growing global health hub. So this is what this signifies. The memorandum of understanding was signed with WHO. Sorry for the poor images. In fact, the PPT is quite clear. I don't know, I think in projection, this is not good. So in 2022, a formal MOU was signed wherein the government of India has committed a funding of about 250 million US dollars for over 10 years, uninterrupted funding, along with a 20-acre campus at Jamnagar for the creation of the entire unit of GTMC. Apart from that, an additional 85 million US dollars has been provided as additional funding for workforce, for manpower and technical support there. Okay, so this is the amount that government of India has committed. In a way, GTMC is more or less entirely financed by the government. That is something I think we should all be proud of. This is no mean feat to bring a WHO center of this level with this funding support. Means you have arrived. You have arrived at the global stage. That is what GTMC signifies for us, for the Ayurveda fraternity, for the traditional medicine fraternity. What are the focus areas of WHO? There are certain work streams and they have been grouped under major 4 focus areas. These are the focus areas. One is of course research, evidence. There is health systems and policy. Now these may be technical terms. You may not be able to grasp it clearly. Don't worry. You don't have to. Research means you can understand from your own way. Clinical research and other forms of research. Generating some evidence. Health system and policy. Policy formulation, strengthening the health system of a nation. Biodiversity and equity. Biodiversity basically looks at the biological resources, the flora and fauna that exist within nations, which are important for sustaining health. Their protection is important for sustaining health. Equity means that all sections of the population receive health care, irrespective of their caste, creed, socioeconomic status. That is what equity means. And then innovation and technology. Since we are in a fast, rapidly moving technological age, innovation in healthcare, technology in healthcare is the buzzword now. So naturally, within traditional medicine also, there is a dedicated area of focus in GTMC. Okay, so these are the major focus areas, whereas there are different work streams. As you can see here, there is a work stream that looks at leadership and coordination, wherein all these activities are there. There is a work stream that looks at events, which is called as Traditional Medicine Global Summit. So it looks at event management, exhibition, partnerships. There is a work stream on research and evidence, which is self-explanatory. There is a work stream on primary health care and universal health coverage. So here it looks at how you can bring about how data from traditional medicine can be used into health systems and how we can create data portals. Then there is a work stream on indigenous knowledge and biodiversity. I just mentioned what is biodiversity. There is a work stream on digital health applications. So there are these kind of different work streams under the GTMC. So remember, GTMC is a new unit. It has come into existence only in 2023. Okay, so it's only 2 years or just about 3 years in existence. So these are defined work streams. इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि इसमें बहुत ज़्यादा काम हुआ है या कुछ आया है. This is still a work in progress, but this is the roadmap. This is the focus area of GTMC. So in 2023, after it came into existence, it carried out a global traditional medicine summit in 2023. तो इसमें अगस्त 2023 में जामनगर में किया गया था. तब उस वक्त G20 का हेल्थ मिनिस्टर्स का मीटिंग चल रहा था. तो उसके साइडलाइंस में ये ट्रेडिशनल मेडिसिन समिट किया गया. द WHO डायरेक्टर जनरल वाज हियर इन इंडिया टू अटेंड दैट समिट, and it brought about ministers, policymakers, scientists, researchers, etc. So there was a huge gathering, and there was a deliberation on how traditional medicine should be integrated into national health systems. And the final goal of the summit was to build a global evidence-based roadmap for such integration. So this summit ended in something called as a Gujarat Declaration of 2023. I think this you might have heard in the previous few days of classes, perhaps. So Gujarat Declaration basically looks at 3 or 4 points. It's a huge text, you can get it online, but basically what it says is that there are indigenous and local health system. इसका अभी इन दो words का difference मान लीजिएगा. This is not same as Ayush. When you talk about indigenous and local health system, it is not same as Ayush. Ayush refers to 5 disciplines of medicine which have a council, which have an academic curriculum, which have colleges, which have governance and regulatory bodies, etc. So these are called as codified systems. Whereas apart from that, there are several cultural practices which we call as local health traditions or local health systems in different regions of the country. If you go to the Northeast, in each state of Northeast, you will find certain cultural practices involving traditional medicine or folk herbs, right? So these are the local health systems and indigenous practices. Gujarat Declaration says that indigenous practices and local health systems have a role in global health to play. Why do they say that? Because everywhere in the world where traditional medicine exists, they do not exist in the form of codified system like Ayush or traditional Chinese medicine or Korean medicine or Japanese traditional medicine. ऐसा नहीं है. काफ़ी countries में unorganized form से different practices के तौर पर है. That is why, since it is a global traditional medicine center, it says so. And it talks about evidence-based integration into national health systems. It talks about how to bring in traditional medicine into universal health care and how to look at ethical dimensions in research. So these are the gist of the Gujarat Declaration of 2023. Now what work has so far the GTMCC done? This is the last slide. So have you heard about this thing called as COP, Commission of Parties? Have you ever heard about this? Again, people who read international news and developments. Do you know what is COP, Commission of Parties? So here parties means nations. Okay, so it's a group. It's a group which meets periodically to discuss on health, primarily in relation to climatic and environmental health. So you must have heard about something called as a Paris Agreement, that is quite often discussed in media. Paris Agreement, basically it is an agreement in relation to climate change that is occurring globally. It asks member states to adopt certain steps to reduce the impact of pollution, environmental pollution through industries and other occupational hazards to mitigate environmental degradation. So this COP16, this is 16 refers to the round of conference. Conference of Parties or Commission of Parties that has been. So COP16 was held in Colombia 2024. वहाँ पर GTMC has co-led discussions on health, the health dimensions with the environmental health. Secondly, it has held regional consultations in India, Southeast Asian headquarters. I was part of this regional consultation for WHO to create a strategy roadmap for research in Southeastern Asian region. What is the research that traditional medicine should do? So we were engaged. It's a very huge gathering, and we were divided into small committees to discuss within ourselves and create points to integrate into the final roadmap or report. So then they have also done similar strategy consultations in the Eastern Mediterranean region and African region. They have plans of actions. This time for the third plan of action, GCTM has contributed. And now in December 2025, forthcoming month, we are also going to do the second Global Traditional Medicine Summit, which will be held in New Delhi. So as part of this summit, there is going to be the release of something called as the Global Traditional Medicine Library. Have you heard of something called as TKDL, Traditional Knowledge Digital Library? Has anybody here heard in any of the speeches over the past few days? No. Okay. So TKDL basically is a repository which has details on traditional knowledge, substances, formulations, practices, etc. that are there in traditional knowledge captured within Indian landscape. Why? In order to protect the intellectual property right of these practices so that they are not adopted and copied in other countries. So Global Traditional Medical Library is going to be a repository of publications, of academic outputs, of different kinds of reports of traditional medicine from across the world, which will be accessible in one touch on a portal. So this is going to be released in the second Global Traditional Medicine Summit. So in a nutshell, now you have seen, if you look at, now I'll come back to the question, WHO is in a crisis, WHO doesn't have fund, right? WHO का काम थोड़ा challenging होने वाला in the forthcoming decades, unless Trump or a future US administration starts pumping in more money, WHO is going to be in a crisis. So the core WHO will have challenge, whereas GTMC in itself will stand out as an exemplary unit if it is able to go along the path that it has envisioned itself as a shining traditional medicine unit under the aegis of the WHO. So thank you very much for a very patient hearing, and once again thank you to the staff of GCIMS for organizing this. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I saw a few of our friends were unable to control sleep, so I apologize to them for making the session boring. Any questions? Is जी जी उसमें यही होगा, क्योंकि जब कोर एरिया है, देखिए 4 फोकस एरियाज है और वर्क स्ट्रीम्स है, तो इसमें क्या होगा कि प्रत्येक वर्क स्ट्रीम के तहत कुछ प्लान ऑफ एक्शंस डेवलप करेंगे कि आगामी 5 साल में हमें ये सब करने हैं। प्रोजेक्ट्स ही होंगे ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा कि हमें ये एविडेंस बिल्डिंग के लिए ये प्रोजेक्ट करना है, इस रीजन में करना है, इन पार्टनर्स के साथ हमें करना है। सो प्लान ऑफ एक्शंस उभर के आएंगे फॉर 5 years, फॉर 10 years। फिर थोड़े से विजन डॉक्यूमेंट्स क्रिएट करके आएंगे कि प्रत्येक प्रत्येक रीजन में हमें ये करना है ट्रेडिशनल मेडिसिन के तौर पर। फिर पॉलिसीज कैसे और सशक्त बना सकते हैं इंटीग्रेशन के लिए, what is the additional new kind of data that we need with regard to traditional medicine. So all these different dimensions will be deliberated upon, and there will be road maps that will be attempted to create. This is what usually happens in these kind of summits, and there will be some declaration like New Delhi declaration that will be. So WHO के recruiting policies में केवल BMS आइडेंटिफाइड नहीं है, बट हो सकता है कि GTMC में भविष्य में ये सब अपॉर्चुनिटीज खुल जाए, क्योंकि ये ट्रेडिशनल मेडिसिन का एक डेडिकेटेड सेंटर है। तो ट्रेडिशनल नेचुरली लॉजिकली ट्रेडिशनल मेडिसिन के रिसोर्सेस वहाँ पर बहु मात्रा में आनी चाहिए, कोई शक ही नहीं है। तो फिलहाल तो उनके पॉलिसीज में ये नहीं, तो अभी तो वो ओपनिंग लग नहीं रहा एज ऑफ नाउ, बट आई एम श्योर it will evolve and it will also happen. I think by the time you finish your courses, there will be opportunities in GTMs, and many of you should aspire for that also. But they may need a postgraduate degree. UG may not suffice. जी हाँ, नहीं देखिए, एक इम्पैक्ट तो मैन पावर पे होगा कि देखिए आपको इतना बड़ा मैन पावर मेंटेन करना है, आपके कंट्री ऑफिसर्स है ना, आपके रीजनल ऑफिसर्स है, आपका हेडक्वार्टर्स है, आपका स्टाफ स्ट्रेंथ इतना ज़्यादा है, तो उनको तो आपको पगार देना ही है। यहाँ पर आपका पैसा श्रिंक हो रहा है, तो फिर मैन पावर पे सबसे पहले काम आएगा। तो अभी WHO ने फ्रीज किया है रिक्रूटमेंट। तो इनफैक्ट मैंने GTMC में एक एग्जाम लिखा था कंसल्टेंट के लिए, मुझे सिलेक्शन भी हो गया था, मतलब मैं लिस्ट में आ गया था, मेरा नाम आ गया था, बट फिर ट्रंप ने ये विड्रॉ कर दिया और WHO ने रिक्रूटमेंट फ्रीज कर दिया। So now they are not recruiting any new personnel into any of the offices in anywhere in the world. कंसल्टेंट्स के तौर पर वो रिक्रूट नहीं कर रहे, तो मेरा भी रिक्रूटमेंट रुक गया। सो मैन पावर पे तो पहला असर होने वाला है। दूसरा असर होने वाला है द कैपेसिटी टू कैरी आउट प्रोग्राम्स। जैसे आपको वर्कशॉप ऑर्गेनाइज करनी है टेक्निकल कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग के, तो वहाँ पर आपको फंड की दिक्कत है, आपको रिसोर्स पर्सन लाने में वो सब चैलेंजेस आने लगेंगे, आपके प्रोग्राम्स में चैलेंज आएंगे। तो हर एक पहलू में WHO जहाँ जहाँ भी स्पर्श कर रहा है अपने काम के द्वारा, सब में धीरे धीरे से इम्पैक्ट होने लगा, बिकॉज मनी इज रिक्वायर्ड फॉर resources, for human resources as well as technical resources like projects and other forms of vaccines, drugs, all this, यहाँ पर सब effect होने वाला है। This is the impact that is going to happen. We hope that this will change. Trump, well, there is definitely political reason, because see, अगर मान लीजिए सबसे ज्यादा पैसा मैं आपको दे रहा हूँ आपकी दुकान चलाने के लिए, ठीक है, आप एक दुकान चला रहे हैं, आप 10 लोगों से पैसा लेके दुकान चला रहे हैं, ठीक है, ओके, मतलब आपको स्व फंडिंग नहीं, तो आप एक बिजनेस अग्रीमेंट पे है, ठीक है, आप मुझे फंडिंग दीजिए, जो मुनाफा आएगा उसमें से 1% मैं आपको दे दूंगा, जितना आपने दिया है उसके उसके अनुरूप मैं आपको ये दे दूंगा, मुनाफा दे दूंगा। अब मैं सबसे ज्यादा आपको पैसा दे रहा हूँ, ठीक है, मुनाफा तो मुझे दे रहे, लेकिन मैं चाहता हूँ कि कुछ और मुझे मिल जाए। हाँ, मैं चाह रहा हूँ कि आप मेरे प्रोडक्ट्स को ज्यादा बेचो, हाँ, मुझे ज्यादा एक ये दो, वहाँ पर स्कोप दो। तो आप कह रहे हैं नहीं नहीं, ये मैं नहीं कर सकता, इतने लोग हैं, मैं सेक्युलर हूँ, इतना डेमोक्रेटिक हूँ, मैं कर नहीं सकता। तो फिर थोड़ी देर के बाद मैं कहूँगा मैं क्यों दूँ, फिर मुझे क्या जरूरत है देने की, तो तुम उनसे ही ले लो, सिंपल बात, पॉलिटिकली यही। And of course, the COVID-19 crisis, a crisis of confidence that happened. US was very upset primarily that the Director General was probably colluding with China. ऐसा एक accusation था उस टाइम पे कि ये हो रहा है, तो ये था, it's a political. US wants changes in the kind of structure that is there within WHO. It wants a lot of changes to happen. No, see, science, these are terms which have definitions. Now, for example, you can talk about knowledge system. You can say that knowledge systems are there. So there is no problem there. Knowledge system is something that is carried on through generations, either by an oral transmission method or by a practice method, or there are documentation. This sub hai. When you say science, one thing is there are certain things for science. One, that there has to be a demonstrability, there has to be a replicability. So there are things like that that come into question. So for traditional practices, as we know, within Ayurveda, of course, you will know, you are too new to traditional medicine. So the thing is that with traditional medicine, the challenge always has been that how can I show that something that I give for you for one condition will act in exactly the same manner for him when I give the same to him. In fact, he may have a different kind of result because he's a very different kind of person. उसका body constitution अलग है. So that is the individualization, and that is the beauty of traditional medicine. Okay, we look at individuals and we care for them. The condition is something we try to understand the imbalance. Through the condition, we understand the imbalance, and then we do a subjective intervention. So now, for policies, policies look at scale, at large population scales. So a policy maker wants to know, like vaccine में क्या होता है कि once a vaccine is approved, you know I can blindly give this vaccine to 10,000 people, 1 lakh people, at scale, at a large mass. So that is what policymaker wants. And when subjectivity, individualization, and challenges come, that becomes a bottleneck even for the policymaker. So policymaker has to find a way, and even we have to find a way of how to present this thing. So I think Ayush now is quite actively working in those lines, and there are a lot of changes. So this will not be the case, at least with India, in the forthcoming few years. It is not the case with traditional Chinese medicine at all. It's quite well recognized globally.
As you has been the largest provider for this, since it has taken out itself, so can we expect that the medical communication which was being done by USA will come to a whisper for
Medical manipulation by use.
by medical communication? I mean that USA will, as you said, right now, India, हम आपकी दुकान चला रहे हैं और से एक्सप्लेन करेंगे.
हाँ देखिए, यूएस का डिमांड्स बेसिकली शुरू हुए थे कोविड के टाइम पे, कि उनको लग रहा था कि डब्ल्यूएचओ अपनी जो जिम्मेदारी है भरपूर निभा नहीं रही. क्योंकि देखिए, फर्स्ट केस रिपोर्ट हुआ था दिसंबर 2019. इनफैक्ट ग्लोबली नहीं रिपोर्ट हुआ है, चाइना में रिपोर्ट हुआ है, वुहान में. चाइना ने उसको रिपोर्ट नहीं किया डब्ल्यूएचओ. इनफैक्ट देयर इज अ डिक्टम दैट मेंबर स्टेट्स शुड रिपोर्ट एनी डिजीज ऑफ कंसर्न or to have an outbreak effect. It has to report to national health system, and the national health system should report to the international health regulatory body, that is WHO. तो वो रिपोर्टिंग हुआ नहीं. रिपोर्टिंग हुआ है अर्ली जनवरी. और जब WHO को रिपोर्ट हुआ था, तो WHO did not immediately sound out to all member nations that something like this has already been reported. So you have to be careful. So if WHO had reported much earlier, probably cross-border travel would have stopped from China. So to a very large extent, maybe transmission was stopped. So these were things that the US government and many other governments in the world, I think even individually, if you ask me, I too feel that there has been a lapse from the WHO angle, and it has not been very satisfactory explanation as to why this kind of delay has been. So from that point of time, US and Donald Trump was the president even then. So he has been demanding that we need to sort of change this kind of governance structure within the WHO. We need to bring in more transparency. We need to bring in more accountability. All these kind of things. So वहां से शुरुआत हुई है इसकी. तभी भी उन्होंने विड्रॉ किया था. 2019 में भी US had withdrawn from WHO. But by 2020, Trump lost the election. Biden came into power, and Biden then rejoined the WHO. So this is the thing. तो ये है. So it's not a manipulation by the US, but I think there were concerns. There were important. हाँ.
नहीं पता शायद कि वो वैसे उसको फंड नहीं करता. तो क्या ये नेशनल मेडिकल सिस्टम एक अपॉर्चुनिटी है कि WHO ज़्यादा कंसिडर
नहीं नहीं, मुझे नहीं लगता, क्योंकि अगर आप जीटीएमसी की बात करें तो जीटीएमसी तो पूर्णतः जैसे आप देख रहे हैं भारत सरकार की तरफ से उसका पूरा फंडिंग। सो आई डोंट थिंक द यूएस डायमेंशन विल इवन इम्पैक्ट हियर। कोई रोल नहीं, बिल्कुल नहीं। Now I don't know how to answer this question. Officially, I will not answer. I will give you a very personal answer. My reading. Now you know these curriculums. Even if you take them independently, if you have gone through the syllabus of these curriculums, you can see that they're quite extensive as programs, as medical disciplines. Whether it is Ayurveda, whether it is homeopathy, Siddha, any of these disciplines. This is an extensive curriculum for over 5.5 years. Similarly, MBBS curriculum is also extensive, and you have different subjects that are being taught. Now, when you say integration, especially at the curriculum level, this is very tricky. One thing is clear, that of course you will not be able to do justice in a way that you would have done independent if you are teaching a program. So there are many things that you will have to perhaps re-look into or cut short or readjust. What kind of impact will that have on a graduate who comes out? So what will be the graduate known as? Now, if you say he is going to be known as Bachelor of Integrated Medicine, does he have a job opportunity? Are there hospitals who are going to recruit Bachelor of Integrated Medicine? Or are there hospitals which, do that kind of, there are of course, integrated medicine is happening in several setups, but us scale mein kahan par? Secondly, does that have a negative impact on the patient or the healthcare beneficiary? So there are many questions that need to be answered, and those questions may also need a lot of evidence that ऐसे risks नहीं है. You will have to bring about that kind of evidence also. So this is going to be a long process. So I don't think it is not an against kind of thing, but it is more of a concern. कि कैसे होगा, and where will it stand, and what will be the final outcome? So it cannot be hurried and it cannot be rushed through. It needs a lot of deliberation. That is what it is, because it impacts careers. So thank you all, and gratitude for all questions that you've asked.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing such an inspiration perspective. And we are truly grateful to have you here.